As of now, I know myself to be a conflicted being. That what I call my higher self is what Fichte calls the self, or das Ich, the consciousness which sets all reality, and what Hegel calls reason. And my empirical self, the individual that you see, is my lower self, because it is human, all too human, and I have a conflict within myself between my higher self, which is the universal reason at work in the world, and my lower self, which is limited in his body and his empirical existence. So that's just to make things clear. And I would like to quote a sentence from Emerson that we find in Die Frohliche Wissenschaft by Nietzsche, and this is German translated into French, translated into English, so I'm not sure that the original sentence is accurate, but it says, "For the poet and for the wise, all things are friends and sacred, all experiences useful, all days holy, all humans divine." And this is the state of mind that I am trying to adopt, knowing that I will fail in the way, but I nonetheless set myself this poetic wisdom as a goal to achieve. And Hegel says that spirit, which is the development of reason, shall recognize itself everywhere on earth. And I would like to comment on a book by Gregory Hood, published in 2016, titled "Waking Up from the American Dream." And there's a preface by Kevin MacDonald. And I define myself as reason, but also as the negative, and the process of consciousness which goes through the white nationalist moment is the path of the negative, and that I know that spirit, world spirit, can only become conscious of itself by going through the path of the negative, which is a painful, difficult, long, and exhausting path, but which enables spirit to become conscious of itself. And so I will try to explain the introduction of the book. And Kevin MacDonald, who is a very intelligent scientist, says that Gregory Hood is a brilliant author with a sense of humor and a depth in his insight into complex issues. So he's already a spiritual, not totally, but vaguely spiritual man, because he manages to grasp the complexity of difficult problems with a deep understanding. And the book is a moment in the development of white identity and white self-consciousness, and it's an intellectual revolt against modern America. And I made a video in which I said that the greatest American ever was Thomas Sowell, the Afro-American libertarian. I don't refute what I said, but I just explained the process of consciousness which is at work in modern America and in the world at large. And Kevin MacDonald says that for the conservatives, the immigrants are just like us, and he says that actually they're not. And the identity of the we and the us, the self and the other, is a moment in the process of the development of spirit, because spirit is that which equalizes the other with the self, and spirit finds its own true freedom in its equality with the other. So equality and liberty become one in spiritual self-cognition. And to accept the other, any other, as a reflection of the self is the most difficult task to achieve, because spirit must acknowledge that the worst horrors that we witness in the world are manifestations of himself, and this is the most difficult task, and this is only spirit which has the strength to acknowledge his radical other as a part of himself, and that's the entire philosophy of Hegel. And yeah, and the whole development of consciousness is a reaction against the implicitly anti-white abstract universality of the left. The left in America and in the whole Western world is implicitly anti-white, but they hide their hatred of whites behind the curtain of virtue and brotherhood. But to be anti something means to be determined by this something, and so you are not free. You have your behavior, your thoughts, your conduct, your standards in the other that you reject. And by being explicitly anti-racist, they are implicitly anti-white, because they unconsciously acknowledge that only whites can be racist. And the whole development of the modern left consists in becoming what it is in its own concept, namely an anti-white, and not just anti-racist, but anti-white. And it produces a dialectical reaction of those who are implicitly white. They have a white skin color, and they are biologically defined as European Caucasians. They don't know that they are white, but by the pressure, the negative pressure exerted upon them by the left, they will be forced to think of themselves as the left thinks of them. So the left believes that all whites are racist, potential Nazis, and the dialectical irony of the development of spirit is that once you cross the path leading from abstract leftist universal brotherhood to just conservatism, you are already crossing the threshold which will lead you by a logical process to National Socialism and the most radical negation of all current existence, current existing political, sociological state of things. So when the left says, if you're not with us, you're a Nazi, in some sort of dialectical irony, they are saying the truth, because the logical necessity implies that once you separate yourself from the leftist abstract worldview, which negates the particularity of whites, you are already on a path which will lead you, if you are logically consistent, to adopt a very negative view of the left and of the current political ideology, and by definition to become a radicalized right-winger. And yeah, and he talks about this book being the awakening of America. And Gregory Hood talks about concepts such as identity. He says that identity is more important than equality and freedom, and that Hegel shows in his logic that the concept of identity contains in itself the concept of difference, because what is identical to self is different from the difference and from the not self. So you cannot think of identity without difference, and what is different from what it is not, so it is identical to itself in its difference. So that's dialectical shenanigans, but the truth is that from a logical standpoint it is true, and Hegel says that the truth shall be grasped as the identity of identity and difference. And there's another dialectical trick, is that the left presents itself as accepting difference, and they claim that all humans are identical. So they defend difference, the acceptance of Hispanic immigrants and Asian immigrants and Puerto Rican immigrants or whatever. They accept ethnic difference in the name of the universal identity of mankind, and the right defends identity, white identity, in the name of the right of self-differentiating from this abstract universality. So in the political development of America and the whole of Western Europe, you have the proof that Hegel's logic is coherent and that identity and different cannot be thought of independently, but they are in a conceptual unity. And this is their truth. And he says that this book is about disillusionment, and he was being dragged kicking and screaming into accepting a worldview that he would rather avoid. But the truth is that God, in his process of awakening, which is world consciousness or reason, God is disillusioned about himself because he must accept that what he sees in the world is his own reflection, his own mirror, and that the most difficult task for reason and for God and for spirit is to accept the world as being his own manifestation and not to fantasize about another world, but to accept and to recognize itself in this current world. There's also in the book the idea that the fundamental principles of the American Constitution, if they are led to their logical conclusion, they bring about modern America. So there's this Hegelian idea that a being or a concept consists in developing all its inner necessary potentialities, which, because they are necessarily developed, are not potentialities but become effective or wirklich, so that America became what its principles implied necessarily that it would become. That's an idea developed in the book, and it's a great book. He says, if you've purchased this book, you've made a courageous decision, because taking the path of the negative, which is called taking the red pill, is a painful process to wake up from a pleasant dream. But you can't stay asleep forever. But what is awakening through the movement of white nationalism in America is not only white consciousness, it's the whole consciousness of reason and of spirit, because white identity, white nationalism is a moment in the development of self-consciousness, of reason and of spirit. And yeah. And he says that in his childhood there was no trauma, no abuse, no bullying, no disease, no racial slurs, no terrible secrets or horrible injuries, no guns, no violence. So he had the perfect childhood, except that it lacked it lacked nothing, and nothing is precisely the path of the negative. So it was so without any trouble that the only thing it lacked was trouble, and that's what brought forth his negative political development, which is the adoption of white nationalism, and which is, he says, the most hated movement in the West. And he says, I knew something was deeply wrong with the world I lived in, and I found my way in the most hated, marginalized, and repressed social movement in the world. I joined a group of people who are portrayed by the media as violent, extreme, and crazy. And he defined myself as the exact opposite of everything which is preached in the mainstream culture. But the opposites are in a conceptual and a necessary unity with one another. So this is the principle of polarity. You are your own opposite. Because in a relationship of opposition, you are what you are to the extent that you are not what you are not. So you are determined to be what you are by the exact opposite of that which you are not. So you have your being in the other, that which you are not. And that's conceptual speculative thinking. So by negating radically the current political and cultural zeitgeist, he became the exact opposite. So in a way, he expressed the truth of the moral, the current moral and political and cultural order in the West. So I just wanted to say that I must stop the video now, but I gave my broad ideas about this book. And if you want more, there are videos about the phenomenology of the European spirit. I put the link down below.